The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today show. My name is Neil Rochlani, filling in for Dan Bespris, who is now taking off Thursdays and Fridays. I'll be hosting on Thursdays. Adrian Benjamins will be on Fridays, and every week I'm going to have a co-host. I'm going to try to rotate different guys around. Today, I have Ethan Noroff. Ethan, before I bring you on, though, I want to just mention our sponsor, Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee. Taste the Kona difference. That's what Adrian used to always say. I don't even know if that's their tagline, but I kind of like it. You can find their products at hawaiianisles.com or on amazon.com. Ethan, are you a coffee drinker, first of all?
Oh, yeah, man. I got to be. Come on. As a teacher. And
that's right. You're up early.
As a late-night fantasy researcher of all the stuff and things, of course, I got to be heavily caffeinated.
I have like my go-to. I'm not a coffee drinker, but I'm a caffeine person. So I have to admit, I've not had a lot of Hawaiian Isles, but I know it's delicious. All right, I'm going to get done shilling for this company. All right, Ethan. So basically, we went over the tentative format. Before we do that, I just want to say, I told Dan that I wanted to have different guests on because I want to give different people opportunities to, do the show with me. But it's really my way of trying to pick the brains of people that are smarter than me and trying to figure out how I can be better next season of fantasy. So a lot of what we'll be talking today, we'll be trying to help yours truly get better at fantasy basketball. So thank you for being on and sharing your wisdom.
I'm happy to do it, man. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm happy to get your insight. I know you've been a long time. I don't really think we've spoken before. You've been a long time fantasy NBA guy, right? You go back to, you said, what site did you start with?
Yes, sir. So I first broke in with RotoWorld actually while I was still in college. My senior year of college, so we're talking about 2011 to date myself just a little bit here. Mm-hmm. I started working for RotoWorld, and I just happened to come into contact with the editor-in-chief over there at the time, Steve Alexander. And, I just took a chance one day and said, hey, man, what's it take to write for RotoWorld? I'm just kind of interested in getting my name out there. And he said, well, why don't you send me some sample blurbs? And the rest was sort of history after that. So it was pretty cool. Spent almost a decade over there in between two different stints. That's how Brewski and I came into contact. And, through and then I got through to Dan actually through a separate portal. And then that's how we all are kind of in the same world together now. But yeah, a lot of experience in the industry, and it's a fun place to be, man. It's only the subject of continued conversation. And I think the community is growing every season.
That's fantastic. I feel like such a novice. I've been doing this for a year. And basically, I emailed Aaron Brewski, and I had one phone call with him. I don't really know much about him. Did you? So you must have stories about Aaron Brewski, right? You don't have to share him now, but I'm guessing you do. Because to me, he's like the man in the high castle. Like I talked to him once, and I have no idea what the heck he's doing all the time.
He's sort of like if you ever watch the Deal or No Deal game show, and they have the banker behind the window where all you can see is a silhouette. I feel like that's what you're picturing right now.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think about when I think of Aaron. Did you do multi-sports or just basketball?
Just focus on basketball.
Okay.
That was really a primary area for me because growing up, baseball was actually the sport that I played the longest. And, so to be able to keep that fandom with that sport was important to me as time progressed. But be able to work in basketball, sport that, I dabbled in. But then when I was in middle school and said, okay, I'm 5'4" in seventh grade, and this probably isn't going to work out for me, I started examining the other side a little bit more. So, kind of followed that path accordingly.
Yeah. Yeah, I was really not much of an athlete myself. Tennis was my sport. And even that, that's not like a man's game anyway. So it's
tennis is the number one sweat producing sport. If you're
is it really?
Well, if you're talking singles, think about all that running baseline.
I know. Anyway, it didn't have the cachet of like basketball or baseball or football for that matter. All right. Let's move into a little bit of fantasy stuff I want to talk about today. I had asked you we talk a little bit about fantasy formats. So let's just get a little background. How many leagues did you play in this past year?
Played in 4 different leagues.
Okay. What were the formats?
Three of them were head-to-head, and one of them was roto.
Do you have a preference?
Yeah, I mean, well, look, I think both leagues have something to offer. I like rotisserie because I think it's the better measurement of the actual best team over the course of the entire season. With head-to-head, it sort of offers that fantasy football element, if you will, where if you catch a team on the right week based off of schedules, then you can easily take them down. And that's not really a reflection of the best drafting or the best overall talent. So that's why I tend to lean more toward rotisserie.
Yeah, I played mostly rotisserie, and then I started doing head-to-head last year. I did 3 seasons this past year. I did 1 rotisserie and 2 head-to-head. I did okay, but I'm still trying to figure out the playoffs. I have not done well in the playoffs. I've gotten to the championship, but I didn't win either of my championships. Very bitter about that. Because I felt like I won the regular season in both my leagues, and I could not figure out how to stream properly. So I'm not going to bug you about that, but I do want to ask you, well, first of all, how deep were your leagues?
The most shallow team, or the most shallow league, rather, excuse me, was 10 teams, and the deepest league was 14.
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you. I was 12 and 14.
Yeah. I think that's the most common thing that you're going to find is leagues in between 10 teams and 14 teams. If you're talking 16 teams, you're talking about a level of depth that's beyond just, hey, we're casually doing this as a thing beyond amongst friends or something like that. That's a real investment and probably better served as like a dynasty or a keeper format. And if you're talking about leagues that have 8 teams or fewer, I mean, it's just so shallow that everybody's team, even if you don't really know much, can wind up being pretty good. So some people enjoy that, but for the level of dedication that I contribute toward this effort, and I know a lot of my peers and friends do as well, we're a little bit beyond that at this point in our experience.
Yeah, I feel like anything less than 12 is kind of like, I don't want to say it's too easy, but it's like you don't really have to know much to do well because there's so many.
Yeah. I mean, for those shallow leagues that I've played in the past, it's almost like my queue is so filled with those quote unquote sleepers, where it's like my roster size just isn't even big enough to fill all these guys that I want to draft because the league is just so shallow. And I think drafts are obviously won with every pick that's made or not made. But at the same time, if you hit on 2 of those back end picks, especially in a deeper league, those sleeper style picks, those overlooked guys, it can really be such a difference maker. And that opportunity isn't really there in those shallow formats.
Yeah. So, I don't know if you saw Dan was talking earlier this week. I don't know how much you get to listen to his show still, but he was doing some analysis on when do the rankings start to get off kilter from the end season results. Do you know what I'm talking about here? Or do you know what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he saw basically somewhere in the 40s or 50s is when you can start to – the rankings really don't match up with end-of-season results that well. So basically his conclusion, or one conclusion was you don't necessarily have to follow the rankings that closely once you get to the middle rounds. And you can kind of go with your guy. Like I tend to reach is probably a wrong word. I tend to go with those sleepers or guys I think that I value more than the general ranks, probably by the 7th round, 8th round. Do you have like anything like that when you're drafting?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always like a comfort factor involved, right? So we set a limit for ourselves and we say, hey, if like let's use Jaren Jackson Jr. as an example because he was a popular sort of sleeper pick who rose as it got closer to the tip-off. We say, hey, if it's round 7 and Jaren Jackson Jr. is still on the board, I'm just going to go for it, or whatever the round cutoff was in your particular league. Then, I could totally understand that logic. Me, myself, I mean, I'm a guy who drafted Brandon Ingram in a multitude of leagues this year. I think in 3 out of 4 it was inside the top 50. So I definitely subscribe to that idea of if you want a guy and you believe in a guy, make sure you go get that guy.
Yeah.
And while it didn't work out for me because as soon as Brandon Ingram started playing well, he obviously went down with the season-ending injury. At the same time, for me, I would have hated to see Brandon Ingram break out on another team, sit there and go, man, that's a guy I wanted to draft. I should have drafted. I tried to get the value pick. I don't even like what this guy has to offer for my team. I would rather sync with the guys that I really choose versus sync with what I deem to be a value pick or something like that. Of course, there are going to be situations where, that guy that you never expected to slide to you in the 2nd round, 3rd round is on the board, and you're like, okay, well, I know that I need to take him in this spot because of reason X or reason Y. But I feel like the more that you're able to invest in your actual players of choice, and as long as the talent matches up with the construct and build of your team, the more invested you're going to be in managing it overall, right? I mean, it's an asset that you directly control, and managing it and the strategy behind that is really what winds up winning leagues.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good point in terms of getting the guys you want. I tend to be very safe with my first few picks. I have guys I want, but I try to avoid going more than one round ahead of what I think they're going to go. You know what I mean? What I think the consensus is going to take them. I don't want to reach too much, even if I think a guy's going to break out. And sometimes I probably miss out on guys. I'm trying to think this past season, who was it that I missed out on? It was, Buddy Hield. I was really big on Buddy Hield this year. I don't know where he was projected, but I wanted him kind of in that sixth, seventh round range, and I think he was taken earlier, and I really regret not taking him because obviously he had a monster season. Any players like that stand out for you, or anything from the draft that you're looking back on that you wish you would have done differently?
I think I should have valued point guard a little bit as more of a more urgent priority in the earlier rounds versus trying to wait, because I think this particular year those point guards sort of fell off of a cliff. That really impacted the overall build and construct of my team. There were a couple of guys that I was not say a miss, but probably overvalued in terms of where I could have drafted them. Brandon Ingram being one that we just mentioned, and Hassan Whiteside being another. Anyone who drafted, a guy like John Wall obviously had their team torpedoed at an early point in the campaign, but that's the thing with when you draft out of value instead of drafting, in the talent and the situation that you believe. So I think for me moving forward next year, I'm probably going to prioritize the point guard position a little heavier and realize that I can find those other stats that I'm looking for in later rounds probably a little bit easier. I think one mistake that people make is they look at the overall rank, or they look at name value over the game value, especially in terms of the construct of how your team is built. And sometimes people will draft a category just to say, oh man, I don't have and this is specifically for head to head, because in a rotisserie league, you if you punt a single category in a rotisserie league, you almost have to have a perfect team across the board otherwise. And that's just so hard to win a league that way. So it's a different draft strategy. But in a head-to-head league, if you're already punting a category like assists when it comes to point guards, and it's the 6th or 7th round, and you say, oh man, I don't have a point guard, I have to draft one out of panic now, you might as well, you would be better off adding to a strength versus just kind of wasting the pick in that spot, because you're not going to win assists on a weekly basis. And if that's the only reason you're drafting that player, then what purpose does he serve on your team?
Yeah. I'm still trying to figure out how to manage the head-to-head versus rotisserie. I think I'm still playing it like a rotisserie when I draft. I'm thinking of it in that mindset. And even week to week, I haven't been able to shift over completely. I don't know if you ever heard Adrian Benjamin's strategy, but his draft strategy is 3 bigs and 3 point guards in the first 6 picks. Then he goes wings later. He doesn't even look at wings for the first, unless someone falls to him.
Yeah, and I don't think that's a bad idea, because you're going to wind up finding the majority of your difference makers in either of those spots. And big men can be defined as power forwards or centers. It's sort of nebulous in today's game. So I think that's where you're going to find the majority of your difference makers. I get that. At the same time, if I have the 8th overall pick in a 12-team league, and Paul George is sitting there with my 2nd round pick, it's really hard to pass on a player like that. I'm not saying that's the perfect pick or that's a player you should pick, but it's really hard to pass on a Paul George in that spot, even if, you go in with that mindset. So I get it, but I try not to be predetermined for the sake of predetermined going in. I like to have an idea or a plan and maintain some optionality or flexibility within that, because otherwise that's how you wind up making panic picks under the pressure of the clock.
Yeah, exactly. Let's transition over to the head-to-head leagues real quick, because that's where I need the most help. So I want to pick your brain on this. All right. Head-to-head leagues. Are most of your formats like mine, where you play as many games as you want?
Yes. No game limit.
Yeah, so there's no game limit. And you can set them. You set your lineups every day. You can reset your lineups every day.
Most of them are, yeah. I do have one weekly league, which I like the idea of that. It adds another wrinkle of strategy into the draft for sure. Yeah. But I like the idea of that because there's a little bit less manipulating as a result.
Yeah. So my strategy is pretty simplistic. I'm just trying to play the most games in a week. I'm trying to use my transaction. So I'm usually have both of my leagues had a 4 game transaction cap,
Okay.
per week. And so I'm basically using that to like the fringe guys who I'm okay with dropping, and I'm trying to pick up guys. So maybe I'll do like 1 transaction or 2 transactions a week to maximize my games played. Therefore, I'm basically not worried about turnovers because I'm going to probably have a lot of turnovers no matter what I try to do. Um, and then so I'm not even looking at my opponent. Do you look at your opponent in the week when you're deciding how to play your week in head to head?
Not particularly in terms of constructing my strategy. Not
Yeah.
particularly.
So you're not looking at your opponent. What else are you doing that I'm not doing that gets you to the championships?
Well, I think the thing that you have to consider is, what categories would you deem to be winnable in that particular matchup? So, if you look at a team and know that, hey, this opponent, they're really strong in blocks and they're really strong in field goal percentage. So
Yeah.
am I better off streaming a big man, or am I better off streaming a wing that's going to be a difference maker in the steals category, let's say, or something like that?
Fair
So I
enough.
think sometimes, people get not confused, but lost in that shuffle because you're looking for position eligibility as well, right? Hey, I can't play Chris Middleton at center. I need a center in that spot. And if it's about maximizing games played, then you get into a roster crunch. But I think that's where the streaming or the manipulation of that becomes, so important, especially in leagues where you have a 4 pickup a week transaction limit or a 5 pickup a week transaction limit, because, obviously it's a 7-day week. So it's not even an average of 1 per day. And I play in some leagues where, on the waiver wire, if a guy has a big night and you want to go claim him as a free agent, there are some leagues that I play in that allow him to be added immediately, even if the player that you're dropping has played already that evening. And then there are some leagues that I play in that doesn't allow that add until the next day, regardless of whether the player played that evening or just because ad drops aren't allowed until the next day. So then you're talking about, midnight time limit being a factor as well, right? Who lives on the East Coast, who lives on the West Coast, who lives in another time zone, whatever it might be. That's getting really to the extreme of things, So keep your fantasy circle small in terms of the same league, I guess, is the advice there. But I think that more than games played for me in a week is I really try and examine those categories and see where the difference makers are going to be, and then say, hey, I know that player X might only play 3 times versus player Y who plays 4. But if he can get 6 steals and that's the difference for me, then that's more valuable than that extra game for that player in a category that I'm probably going to lose anyway.
Yeah, so I guess that was my first mistake. One of my leagues is based in the Philippines, so that changes all the
It
time.
changes things a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you know Eric Ong, but I joined a league with him. He's a hoop baller here too. I know we can lose track of people. And yeah, ours was also, I forgot about that. Ours was, you cannot pick up same day and play. You have to pick it up. You make a transaction and then it occurs for the following day. And that always threw me off too, because like we were talking about before you came on, or maybe it was on the air. I'm often busy or I forget. And then by the time I go to check my thing, it's the next day and it's too late to add someone, and it throws off my entire thing. So yeah, I gotta pay more attention to that, the settings as well.
Yeah.
Any other advice on head to head you want to give me before we move on to I guess the NBA playoffs?
I would say with head to head, man, like, there's for me, there's never a category that I go into a draft and saying, okay, I'm definitely going to punt this or I'm definitely going to punt that. I don't like to operate from that mindset. But I think the reality is, I like to play in head to head leagues that have eliminated the turnover category, whether that's an 8 category league. So you have, 1 less category, or you replace that with something else, maybe assist to turnover ratio. Just one example that people have used in the past. Maybe it's true shooting percentage. Maybe it's 3-point field goal percentage. There are a variety of things you can use there. Double doubles can be a category, offensive rebounds, you name it, you can use it. So I think, that's definitely my preference, is playing in leagues that don't count that turnover category, just because I don't like to think about that when I'm playing fantasy basketball. Like I like to accumulate the stats, and I know turnovers are a negative stat, but I just like all of the numbers.
Yeah.
Very easy for me to look at for some reason. So, I think that's part of it, and that's my own weirdness. But also, I think more than anything is you want to draft players who can be difference makers. In the first couple of rounds, you want to draft players who say, hey, I know that by drafting this player and by surrounding him with the right complementary talent, that I'm going to win these 3 or 4 categories every single week. Hey, no, I know by drafting this player that he is the equivalent of having, 3 or 4 guys block one shot a game, drafting a Rudy Gobert, let's say. I know that that's a difference maker in a category that doesn't have a lot of them. So I think players like that can be categorical difference makers in at least 3 categories for you and have the potential for more. Those tend to be players that I star or put a little note next to when I'm doing my pre-draft rankings, just because they have such versatility to contribute across the board. And then I think specialists become easier to stream or pick up sort of as the year progresses, because those tend to be the guys who are undervalued or overlooked. And in head-to-head leagues, that's more of a concept than in rotisserie, because you can't really stream specialists in rotisserie and hope to catch up in a category.
Yeah, because then you give up the other categories too much, right? It's just
Right.
I think that's a very good point, because in my rotisserie, I got to the point where I'm like, I just want a balanced team, right? I want to draft guys that contribute across categories. So then, if one goes down, I'm not getting killed in one category. But head to head, you want to be able to dominate. You're much more interested in just dominating a handful of categories than perhaps being balanced, and that's what throws me off for the drafts. I'm having trouble like getting my mind wrapped around that when I'm actually evaluating players. Anyway, Ethan, thanks for the lesson. I know you're an educator, so thanks for helping me learn a little bit about
Very, very, very on brand, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm happy to deliver.
Yeah, not just educating the youth of America, but also the old men playing fantasy basketball. All right, let's go to the playoffs. NBA playoffs are going on. I just think Denver lost to Portland, so that's 1-1. So every series is 1-1 except for Houston, Golden State. Any takes you want to throw at me before I start peppering you with questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Blazers might be like the Blazers and the Nuggets both are such interesting teams because they're both these Western Conference teams that we've said for a while, oh, that's a good regular season team, but they're not going to do anything in the playoffs. And now they're finally playing each other in the playoffs, and they're both kind of doing something, and it's just an interesting series to me. And I think that maybe this is, I think the Nuggets have gotten the juice from the regular season with how good they were sort of unexpectedly. Mm-hmm. But I think this is the time the Blazers sort of get recognized and people start to really say, hey, maybe Damian Lillard is actually really good because he's the common denominator here. And I think when you have those, who's the top 5 point guards or top 3 point guards, whatever types of debates in NBA circles, Lillard is that guy who's like, yeah, he's really good, but is he really that good? And yeah, he is really that good.
Yeah, not a great night tonight scoring, but he is maybe one of the best reality players right now in basketball in terms of in the playoffs. The biggest difference maker maybe right now in the playoffs. Kevin Durant certainly in that category. Giannis, Kawhi, they're all up there, but he's in the conversation. Do you think? Okay, so it's 1-1 now. Do you are you leaning in either way on who you think's going to win this series?
I'm not. I mean, I think that Denver, if Portland had the Yusuf Nurkic available and Enes Kanter's shoulder wasn't compromised, maybe it's a different conversation. But with Denver's talent and sort of their grit, for lack of a better way to say it, I think Malone has done a really good job with that group. And, they seem to find a resiliency, especially after losses. I think they'll do a good job of bouncing back. But it's going to be tough because, Portland's a tough place to play. Those fans go crazy. So they obviously have to get at least one game there, I think, to remain in this series. So, that's going to be a challenge, but it's definitely not impossible. I think if I had to lean right now, I'd go Denver. How about you?
Yeah, I'm leaning Denver too. I mean, the fact they got through that San Antonio series told me a lot about them. They went into San Antonio, they won a game. That's also not an easy place to win. Although Portland's kind of a unique animal. It's kind of like the Las Vegas of basketball arenas. It's just so unique in that arena. We'll see how they handle all that noise and all that commotion and the excitement that those fans bring. But yeah, if Nurkic was there, I think I'd go with Portland. Without him, I'm going with Denver. So 1-1 now. We'll see what ends up. Is there anything you're taking away fantasy-wise from this? With Torrey Craig now in the starting lineup, do you watch these guys to try to forecast for next season, or is this kind of more something that is kind of more noise than actual value?
To be honest, it just sort of reminds me of what a lost season it was for Gary Harris.
Mm.
He's a player who was set, a top 50 draft pick in a lot of leagues, and he just never really got it going this year. He got his new deal to stick with Denver. He's an $80+ million, and he really just never really got it going this year. And there were such promising signs last year that the breakout was real. So I think that's a player who will probably go undervalued in a lot of drafts next year as a result. And probably a player I'm going to put on my list as one of those, late mid-round targets saying, hey, don't forget about Gary Harris.
Totally with you. That's a great observation. I'm a big Gary Harris fan. Did not get him this year because he was very, on the buzz list this year and tended to go a bit earlier than I wanted him. But I will have him on my list. We'll see how far he falls in rankings. Anyone else though? I'm not seeing anyone else from either of these teams that is making much of a difference. I was kind of a Zach Collins guy when he got some of those limited minutes in the beginning of the season in Portland. I don't know if you remember, he had a little run where he had some value. We'll see how he develops in year two. Guys tend to. Excuse me. I believe is this year one or year two for him? Could be year two for him. Anyway, I think he has a chance to improve. So I'm going to watch him in preseason and perhaps put him on late round flyer guys.
I feel like Portland wants Zach Collins to become the player they thought Myers Leonard was going to be.
Yeah, they're trying to make him that. We'll see if he can actually deliver. Unfortunately, Myers Leonard is not in the rotation tonight, so he's out. All right, let's go on to another series. Let's go. Where do you want to go next?
How about out in the West? We'll go with Houston and Golden State.
Yeah, all right. So I thought Houston was going to pull off this game last night, and these really haven't been as close as the scores indicated. I think Golden State is just not messing around this year. You know what I mean? I think they're playing their best lineups, longer minutes. Kevin Durant is just doing everything. He's not taking any possession off. I know they still had some turnovers issues, but it seems like Golden State's much more focused than I thought they would be coming off that competitive series against the Clippers. So what I once thought was a Houston chance, I'm thinking this is going to be like 4-1. I think that maybe Houston gets one game. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was a little bit optimistic. Not necessarily that Houston would win before the series started, but I think they would give them a run.
Yeah,
and I think it takes a lot of gas out of your tank when you come close in not only one but two games, but it's just not quite enough. It's crazy to think that the Warriors are missing DeMarcus Cousins just because it's a testament to how much talent was out there on the floor when he was out there too with them. But when it comes to the Rockets, look, they're so dependent on James Harden. Chris Paul is still a good player, but at this stage of his career, he's not the Chris Paul, the CP3 that so many, sort of think about when they hear CP3's name. And the Rockets are just short on supporting talent. You got guys like Austin Rivers and Daniel House and Iman Shumpert getting fourth quarter minutes. So that's hard. It's a hard formula to sort of put together when you're playing against the amount of talent you are with the Warriors. So I think it could be a 4-1 series, maybe 4-2. I find it hard to believe the Warriors are going to lose two games in a row. So at most, that would be a 4-2 series. So we'll see how it goes down. But if obviously the Rockets have to win Game 3 if they're gonna make a conversation out of it at all.
Yeah, we'll see. I thought we'll see how the home crowd reacts and how much juice they get out of that. The other thing is Capella has kind of been taken out of this series, and he's he's one of their big three now, for lack of a better expression. And he's not he's just not able to be in the rotation against these Warriors the way they're set up. So it just sucks.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think the formula for some teams when it comes to the Rockets has been, okay, we're going to let James Harden do whatever he wants, but we're going to take everyone else out of it. We know James Harden by himself will not beat us, even on his best night. And I think you're going to see more of that getting adopted until the Rockets are able to put a few more talented pieces around him, if they're even able to do that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's not going to be this season. I think the Warriors. Well, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Still, I guess a little ways to go in that series. All right, let's over the East. Start off with Boston, Milwaukee, 1-1 series. Both games, the winner has won by 20 points, which is kind of strange. I know both teams rely, at least Boston's heavily relying on outside shooting. So when they're shooting, when everything's falling for them, they tend to roll. When it's not, they struggle, as we saw in Game 2. What are your thoughts on this series? Any predictions? Any observations so far?
Well, I think that, if you ask Paul Pierce after game one, the series was over. There's that.
What kind
But,
of analysis was that? That's
you
so
know,
funny.
it's almost like he wore the jersey for a period of time in his life if you could only. So, and I think, beyond that, you're looking at two teams that obviously, they each have a fair amount of talent. I think the Bucks were the better regular season team. I don't think there's any arguing that this particular year, more consistent. But I think that they're going to need another guy to step up. If Malcolm Brogdon can get back on the floor, that's going to be a huge boost. The Celtics are obviously still missing Marcus Smart, but if the Bucks can get, a night from Giannis and Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez to go off for like 20 points, I think that's the formula for them where that makes them really difficult to beat. And I think the Bucks, they should be, at least in theory, a team that's capable of matching up with the Celtics. I think it's a good series, and I think it's one that could go to 6 or 7 games.
Yeah, I mean, I'm coming to the series. I was a big Milwaukee proponent. I was really on them. I mean, looking at the stats last night, I don't know if it was last night. I'm kind of confused. Anyway, 44% shooting, but yet they scored 123 points. They have so much firepower on this team. I really do think they miss Brogdon a lot. He does a lot for that team that does not show up in the box score, especially defensively. And I think Milwaukee's in good shape. I know they lost home court advantage. I know Boston is another difficult place to play. Boston probably has more depth in this team, talent-wise. If Milwaukee, though, probably has the best player. I'm going with Bucks in 6. We'll see how it plays out. Any thoughts from you on who's going to win this?
I love it. I would like. My heart wants to pick the Bucks, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah,
my heart wants to pick the Bucks.
Yeah, you're an LA guy, so you're not a Celtics person. I'm taking it. I know you guys don't
I spent a fair amount of time living in what we would call enemy territory, living out in the Boston area. But I don't think it's not even from that particular perspective. I just think that the Bucks they're such a good story because they have the draft investment in Giannis. They got Chris Middleton before he was Chris Middleton, and Brook Lopez for dollar was the best free agent signing of the summer, and just. I like the narrative. There's stuff to like on the Boston side too. Obviously, Gordon Hayward has started to look a lot better, and sort of reminding people, oh yeah, I remember why we all said the Celtics were going to be really good. But I think it's just been such an up and down season for Boston. It's sort of been a roller coaster of sorts, and I think because of that, the consistency or the coherence of that team is what I question more than Milwaukee's right now. So. It's going to be a series, though, and I think we just have to evaluate each game for what it is and try and pretend, not always pretend that we're going to be the Nostradamus of what's going to happen. But I like what Milwaukee's got brewing.
Yeah, they're a great story because they're a small market team that obviously hit on the drafts and they've done good in free agency. And they're not getting big names in free agency, but they're getting good players. You're getting good value, right. Like you said. Brook Lopez was a phenomenal addition. Even George Hill has had some production out there too, coming in there too.
And George Hill is sort of one of those contracts where a lot of fans look at and say, "Why would you trade for George Hill on that contract at that number when you play him, such a marginal role, even with Brogdon out of the lineup?" But if you look at his contract details, I think like 19 out of 20 million next year, something like that, is unguaranteed. Mm-hmm. So to have that trade chip available in a deal. Maybe for a guy like Anthony Davis, just throwing it out there is certainly an interesting card that you could put on the table. I'm not saying Milwaukee has the firepower just in and of itself with that deal to make the AD deal. But, wow, I've thought about Anthony Davis and Giannis on the same team on more than one occasion.
Yeah. If he goes to Boston, I'm just going to be pissed. Anyway, we'll see how that plays out. All right. I'll hide my biases for now. Let's go to the final series. And this series probably has my favorite team in the playoffs. I'm going with the Toronto Raptors. I'm talking about them. Kawhi has been phenomenal this year. Even though they lost game 2, the fact that they're holding Philadelphia to under 100 points each game makes me feel pretty good about what they're doing defensively. Their bench has not really showed up yet this series. I expect that to change. Am I wrong to think Toronto could win the next 3 games?
No, I don't think you're wrong. I think that, the Sixers showed that they're a beatable team even against Brooklyn in the first round, right? So I think that that's definitely on the table.
Mm.
I think that Toronto, as you said, the bench is going to be the big question mark. You can't have a non-existent bench. I want to say in game two, just about 86% of their points came from either Kawhi Leonard, Pascal Siakam, or Kyle Lowry. They've got to have someone else, whether it's Fred VanVleet, whether it's Serge Ibaka, whether it's Norman Powell, some unexpected X factor to step up and say, hey, I'm capable of scoring 10 points. Even Danny Green can get into the mix. So I think that's the key for the Raptors. If they're able to get that, then they're going to be in a good spot because Ben Simmons is not playing his best brand of basketball in terms of what we've seen from him prior. Joel Embiid has looked good at some points, but has looked really banged up at others.
Yeah.
Tobias Harris hasn't necessarily been a difference maker this postseason, and Jimmy Butler has been sort of not all or nothing, but closer to boom or bust than consistent. And so I think there are definitely chinks within the Sixers' armor, and the Raptors, they can definitely be a team that exposes it.
Yeah, and Embiid, in addition to with Gasol in there guarding him, it's also I don't think he's 100%. So
no way.
Yeah,
not even close.
Yeah, he's not even close. And then without that firepower, I just don't think they're going to be able to get it done over a 7-game series. But
I mean, if he were in perfect health, I think it would be a different conversation.
Yeah.
But I don't think that Joel Embiid will ever be in perfect health or what some would deem to be perfect health. And if this were the regular season, I would almost have to say that Embiid would almost certainly be still sitting out. I mean, this is a guy who only played 10 games after the All-Star break. Yeah.
Oh, is that right? I didn't even know that stat. That's crazy. Just 10 games since the break. So they've really been resting him.
And with his history of issues with his lower body, legs, knees, feet, that's obviously a concern.
Yeah. So you like Toronto to finish him off, you think?
I have picked Toronto to come out of that series, yes.
Do you give me any hope that Toronto can win the whole thing?
If you want to accept a magical beacon of hope in the form of a falcon riding a centaur, then yes.
Yeah.
If you don't want to accept that, then I'm going to hold off a little bit. Just only because more than anything else, I don't want to say we've seen this script before because we haven't seen this Toronto team, obviously with Kawhi Leonard, but it just feels so familiar at this point. There's got to be somebody who comes out of the East, but if Toronto and Milwaukee do come out of those series, I'd actually take Milwaukee to take Toronto as the Eastern Conference champion.
That's what I did in my I did a bracket. I did Milwaukee coming out, but I thought Brogdon would be back. And if they don't get Brogdon back, that actually is a difference for me. But we'll see. We'll see. It's obviously a long way away. All right, Ethan, I've kept you on way too long from what I promised you, so I apologize.
It's all good. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so let's wrap up. We were going to talk about some offseason stuff, but I figure we've gone on plenty. I've rambled long enough. I've got you
for the next one.
Yeah, save it for next time. You're on with Dan though every Monday, right?
Yes, every Monday on with Dan.
When he doesn't screw with your schedule, I guess, right? When he doesn't
when we fit it in between babysitters and premieres of Avenger Endgame,
Oh, that's right. You guys both saw the movie this weekend. That's funny. I remember him saying that. I tutor high school kids at night, and they were all talking about this Avengers thing. I have no idea what they were talking about, so I am really out of touch with pop culture. So
you know what? I'm the only person on the planet just about who doesn't watch Game of Thrones. So you don't have to feel too left out of a conversation.
Oh, thank you very much. All right, so your Twitter handle. I'm looking at your Twitter, and you have like 100 times more followers than me. So congratulations on that. You're at Ethan_Nor.
It means nothing, man. It's I think that there's too much stock put into stuff like that, but at the same time, I appreciate the recognition.
Yeah, no, that's great. So at Ethan_Noroff, Norof. I'm at Ball with Neil. Ethan, thanks so much for joining me. I'm going to be getting you back on whenever you want to come back on the show. And with that, we're going to sign off. Once again, I want to mention our sponsor is Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee. Please check them out at hawaiianisles.com or at amazon.com, and Adrian Benjamins will be on tomorrow. Thanks for listening.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.